The Young and the Restless spoilers. For weeks, Mariah Copeland had been unraveling. Sleep came only in fragments, and when it did, it was filled with nightmares she couldn't explain. Every sound in the wind, every flicker of shadow in her apartment felt like a presence returning to claim her. The doctors called it post-traumatic stress, a delayed response to years of manipulation and captivity under Ian Ward. But the nightmares were too vivid, too specific. She could smell the cologne he used, hear the rhythm of his breathing behind her. Sometimes she woke with scratches on her arms and no memory of how they got there. Sharon tried to reassure her, insisting Ian was gone for good, that he had died at the Newman Ranch and that everyone had witnessed his lifeless body being taken away. But Mariah knew better. Monsters like Ian didn't die quietly, they waited. Months earlier, Genoa City had celebrated the end of an era. After one last confrontation with Victor Newman, Ian had been declared dead. His body, discovered at the edge of the ranch grounds, had been carried away under tight security. The funeral that followed was somber, almost ritualistic. Sharon, Nick, and even Mariah attended, each of them hoping this would finally close a chapter that had poisoned their lives. The casket was lowered, prayers were said, and everyone exhaled with relief. Cameras caught the images, Victor standing like a sentinel, Sharon trembling beside Nick, Mariah looking blank. For a moment, it felt like peace had finally returned to Genoa City. But the peace didn't last. The secret scene that followed, the one viewers never forgot, was set inside the ambulance carrying Ian's body to the coroner's office. The paramedics drove in silence, unaware that their passengers' fingers had begun to twitch beneath the white sheet. Then, with a shallow gasp, Ian Ward opened his eyes. His chest rose, a soft, almost satisfied sigh escaping his lips. He smiled faintly, as if waking from a pleasant dream, and whispered something no one could hear. Moments later, the camera cut to black, and fans around the world knew, the devil of Genoa City was still alive. Now, whispers of his return spread through the town like smoke. At first, no one believed it. How could he have survived gunfire, the explosion, and the burial? But strange things began to happen, files missing from police archives, anonymous donations made to the clinic where Mariah received therapy, and most chilling of all, a bouquet of white lilies delivered to Sharon's doorstep with a note that read simply, "Forgiveness is eternal." Sharon burned the note but couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Then came Noah's accident. It happened on a rain-soaked night outside Los Angeles. Noah had been preparing to launch another art-themed nightclub, expanding his creative empire, when something went wrong. Witnesses said he'd been walking toward his car when a dark figure shoved him into the street. The driver who struck him never saw it coming. The impact was brutal, leaving Noah in critical condition, his brain swelling from trauma. When Sharon and Nick received the call, their world collapsed again. They flew to his side, refusing to leave the hospital. To them, it was a random act of violence. To Mariah, it was a message. Ian Ward had always targeted Sharon's weaknesses. First, he exploited her loneliness, then, he turned her daughter into a pawn. Now, he had found a new way to punish her, through Noah, the one child who had always believed in redemption. From the darkness of whatever hole he had crawled out of, Ian watched with quiet satisfaction as the Newmans fell apart. Every move he made was precise, psychological. He wanted Sharon to doubt herself, to relive every mistake she had buried. And he wanted Nick to feel powerless for once, to realize that no amount of money or protection could save his family from the ghosts they had created. At the hospital, Sharon kept vigil by Noah's bed, whispering prayers that faded into tears. Nick dealt with the police, demanding answers that no one could give. The investigators were baffled, security cameras near the scene had been wiped clean. The only clue was a discarded ring, silver, engraved with an old symbol resembling a serpent. Sharon recognized it instantly. Years ago, Ian had worn a similar emblem as the insignia of his cult. When Nick found out, his face turned white. "It can't be him," he said. But deep down, he knew it could. In Genoa City, death was rarely permanent, and evil had a way of finding its way home. Meanwhile, Mariah's condition worsened. She began hearing Ian's voice again, soft and taunting, echoing in her dreams. He would call her my miracle child, the same words he used when she was his captive. One night, she woke to find a message written on her mirror in red lipstick, "I never left you." She screamed, shattering the glass, but when Sharon arrived moments later, the message had vanished. The police found no fingerprints, no sign of intrusion. To everyone else, it looked like a breakdown. But Mariah knew it was real. She could feel him watching her. As days turned into weeks, the tension inside the Newman family grew unbearable. Victor wanted increased security around the ranch. Nikki urged Sharon to leave town with Mariah for a while. But Sharon refused. She had spent her life running, from the past, from her mistakes, from Ian Ward, and she was done running. She vowed to face him if he ever returned. Nick tried to dissuade her, reminding her of what Ian had done to Mariah, but Sharon's resolve only hardened. "He's already taken too much from us," she told him. "I won't let him take our son." Then came the night that changed everything. Sharon was alone in the hospital waiting room when she heard footsteps. She turned, expecting a nurse, but there he was. Ian Ward, alive, standing in the doorway as though he had simply stepped out of a dream. His hair was grayer, his face thinner, but his eyes gleamed with the same cold amusement that once terrified her. "You look well, Sharon," he said softly. "Grief suits you." For a moment, she couldn't breathe. He was real, not a hallucination. Before she could call for help, he stepped closer, pressing a finger to his lips. "No need for panic. I only came to see what love looks like when it's dying." Then, as quickly as he appeared, he was gone, leaving behind a single white lily on the chair. Security footage later showed nothing. To everyone else, it seemed like a stress-induced vision. But Sharon knew the truth, he had been there. She told Nick, who immediately alerted Victor. Within hours, Victor had his men searching every corner of the city. But Ian was always one step ahead. He sent messages instead, cryptic notes left at the ranch, recordings of Sharon's therapy sessions stolen from her doctor's office, even photographs of Noah in his hospital bed, taken from impossible angles. His message was clear, he wasn't finished. What Ian didn't anticipate was Mariah's transformation. The fear that had once paralyzed her was slowly turning into anger. She realized that Ian's power came from the belief that he was unstoppable, immortal. But he bled like anyone else, and she was done being his victim. With Sharon's reluctant support, she began working with Chance Chancellor and Christine Williams to track his movements. They discovered that the ambulance that had carried Ian's body months ago had never reached the morgue. The driver had disappeared, and the second paramedic had been found dead weeks later under suspicious circumstances. Ian had faked his death with help from one of his old followers, then vanished into the underworld, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. Now, that moment had come. Noah's accident had been Ian's warning. His next move would be worse. Late one evening, Sharon returned home to find the front door ajar. She called out for Mariah but received no answer. The lights flickered, and from the shadows, Ian's voice filled the room. "You took her from me once," he said. "Now I'll take everything from you." Sharon grabbed the nearest object, a vase, and turned toward the sound, but he was gone again, replaced by a note pinned to the wall, "You can't protect them all." In panic, she called Nick and Victor, confessing everything. For the first time in years, the fractured Newman family united against a common enemy. Victor vowed to end Ian once and for all, but Sharon knew that confrontation alone wouldn't stop him. Ian's obsession wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about legacy. He wanted to destroy her family because, in his twisted mind, they represented everything he couldn't have: love, forgiveness, belonging. He believed that by killing Noah, by breaking Sharon's spirit, he could prove that goodness was an illusion. That was his gospel. As the storm outside raged, Sharon sat beside Noah's bed, holding his hand. Mariah stood nearby, eyes fierce with determination. They had been victims once, but no longer. If Ian Ward was coming for them, he would find a family ready to fight. The monitors beeped softly, and for the first time in weeks, Noah's eyelids fluttered. Sharon gasped, calling his name. His hand tightened around hers. Somewhere in the shadows, Ian watched through a hospital camera feed, his smile fading. The boy was alive. The story wasn't over yet. Because in Genoa City, evil never really dies, it waits, it plots, and it always comes home. And as dawn broke over the Newman ranch, Sharon Newman understood what that meant. Ian Ward was back, and this time, he wasn't after redemption. He was after blood. For months, no one knew where Mariah Copeland had gone. One morning, she simply disappeared from Genoa City, leaving behind a brief message to her mother and friends: "I need space to heal. Don't come after me." Sharon Newman, though heartbroken, respected her daughter's decision. After all, she understood the need for distance better than anyone. But even Sharon couldn't shake the unease gnawing at her, the choice of Boston, Massachusetts, instead of Fairview, where she herself and many others had once undergone treatment. Fairview was close, secure, and familiar. Boston was distant, isolated, and cold. Mariah had said she didn't want her loved ones to visit, that she needed anonymity. It was logical, even admirable, for someone trying to face her trauma. Yet something about it felt wrong. The way she said goodbye, the tremor in her voice, the hollow look in her eyes, it all hinted at a deeper wound than she had admitted. To outsiders, Mariah's retreat looked like an act of self-care. She had been struggling with guilt and anxiety ever since Ian Ward's shadow had re-entered her life. She told her colleagues she was taking a temporary leave from her work with Cassidy First, a small media company that partnered with non-profit foundations. The trip, she said, was meant to film a new campaign highlighting women's shelters and recovery programs across the East Coast. On paper, it made perfect sense, a chance to rebuild, to find purpose through storytelling. But the woman who came back months later was not the same person who had left. When Mariah returned to Genoa City, those who knew her best saw the difference immediately. Her posture was tense, her laughter forced. The easy warmth that once defined her was gone, replaced by an unshakable detachment. She avoided eye contact, rarely smiled, and often stared into nothingness for long minutes at a time. Sharon noticed first. "She looks like she's still in that clinic," she whispered to Nick one evening. But no one could ask her what had happened. Whenever someone tried, Mariah would shut down, claiming she was fine, that the treatment had helped. Yet her words didn't match her eyes. They carried something haunted, something unfinished. It wasn't until weeks later that pieces of her story began to surface. She mentioned, almost casually, that the facility she stayed in was near Cape Ann, a quiet place by the water known for its high-profile guests and strict privacy rules. The name Havenbrook came up once, but she quickly changed the subject. The more Sharon pressed, the more evasive Mariah became, until one evening, after a glass too many of wine, she finally cracked. Through tears and fragmented sentences, she confessed that something had gone terribly wrong in Boston. She couldn't remember the details, only flashes: a party at the clinic, a man she didn't recognize, a drink she hadn't asked for, and then darkness. The next morning, she had woken up disoriented, her clothes rumpled, her memory blank. She told herself it was a nightmare, the product of medication or stress, but the nightmares that followed felt too real to dismiss. The name Will Hensley came later, a middle-aged therapist or consultant who had been part of the clinic's staff. In her hazy recollection, he had taken a special interest in her, often appearing at odd hours under the guise of checking on her progress. She remembered him offering her drinks during group therapy sessions, something that struck her as odd even then. At first, she had chalked it up to professional kindness, but now, in hindsight, she wasn't so sure. Every time she thought of his face, she felt sick. When Sharon and Nick heard this, their hearts sank. Sharon immediately suspected foul play, but who would target Mariah like that, and why? The answer was chilling in its simplicity: Ian Ward. Ian had manipulated people from every walk of life, believers, businessmen, and outcasts, using them as puppets for decades. Even in death, his network survived him. His charm, his influence, his ideology had spread like poison, recruiting new followers long after he vanished. The connection between Will Hensley and Ian wasn't obvious at first, but as Victor Newman began digging into Havenbrook's financial records, a pattern emerged. The clinic had received anonymous donations over the past 3 years from shell corporations linked to Ian's old affiliates. One of those companies, Marita's Foundation, had once funded Jordan Howard's rehabilitation projects, the same Jordan who had been one of Ian's most loyal and dangerous disciples. Jordan's name had appeared in connection with other recent crimes as well, suggesting that Ian's ghost still lingered, orchestrating chaos through those he had corrupted. If Will Hensley was one of them, it would explain everything: the secrecy, the psychological manipulation, the lost time Mariah experienced. It would also mean that her supposed healing in Boston was part of Ian's grander scheme to break her once and for all. Sharon's instincts told her this wasn't coincidence. Mariah's choice of clinic, the strange behavior of the staff, even the distance, it all fit Ian's pattern of isolating his victims from those who could protect them. He knew Mariah's guilt would make her easy to control, and by preying on her need for closure, he had found a way to hurt Sharon again without ever showing his face. As Sharon pieced this together, Mariah's condition worsened. She began experiencing panic attacks, flashbacks, and brief lapses in memory. At times, she would wake up drenched in sweat, convinced that someone had been in her apartment. On other days, she found herself drawn to old photographs of Ian, staring at them for hours as though trying to decode his intentions. Nick tried to keep things rational, suggesting that they get professional help and contact the authorities. But Sharon's fear ran deeper. She knew Ian's methods. If he was alive, he wouldn't stop until he had torn their family apart again. And if he was dead, then someone was carrying on his work with frightening precision. It was Chance Chancellor who finally uncovered the proof. During an investigation into stolen Newman Enterprises files, he traced a series of encrypted messages between a shell company and a private therapist group in Massachusetts. The messages contained coded reports, patient updates, financial transfers, and detailed psychological profiles. One of those profiles matched Mariah's exactly: age, trauma history, behavioral triggers. The sender was listed as WH, that was enough to confirm it. Will Hensley had been working under the orders of someone else, someone higher. The trail led back to a location in Vermont, a property owned by a man with no digital footprint but a long history of false identities, a man who, according to old police records, had once gone by the name Ian Ward. When Sharon learned this, her blood ran cold. If Ian was alive, he had been watching them all along, waiting for the moment to strike. If he wasn't, then someone, perhaps a former follower, was acting in his name. Either way, Mariah's suffering was no accident. She had been targeted, drugged, and manipulated into silence. The guilt she felt wasn't hers to bear. It had been planted, cultivated like a seed by people who thrived on pain. The revelation shattered what little stability Mariah had left. For days, she shut herself off from everyone, refusing to eat or speak. When she finally emerged, her eyes had changed, no longer frightened, but cold with determination. "He wants me broken," she told Sharon quietly, "but I'm not giving him that satisfaction." She demanded to see Will, to confront him. The authorities hesitated, fearing the trauma might worsen her condition. But Mariah insisted. When she finally came face to face with him in a secure facility, he barely looked human, pale, jittery, and mumbling about redemption and faith. Under questioning, he admitted that he had been paid to monitor her and report back on her behavior. He wanted to know if the light was still there, Will said cryptically. He said she was the key. When asked who he was, Will only smiled and said, "You already know." After that, Will was transferred to a federal hospital, but the damage was done. Sharon realized Ian's reach had never truly ended. Somewhere, someone was still following his doctrine, the belief that pain purified the soul. And Mariah, once again, had become the unwilling centerpiece of that twisted theology. As winter settled over Genoa City, Sharon made a vow: she would end this once and for all. With Nick, Chance, and Victor's help, she began tracing the network that connected Ian's former followers. Mariah, though fragile, joined her mother's cause. She wanted justice, not for herself, but for every victim Ian had manipulated into silence. The path ahead was dangerous, full of ghosts and hidden traps, but this time, she wouldn't face it as a victim. She would face it as a survivor. And somewhere on the eastern seaboard, in a darkened room filled with old videotapes and discarded patient files, a man watched the news coverage of Mariah's return. He smiled faintly, pressing a hand against the screen. "She's stronger now," he whispered. "Good. She'll need to be." Then, with the soft click of a lighter, he burned the photograph of himself labeled Ian Ward, deceased, and the flames danced against his reflection. Because in Genoa City, the dead never stay buried, they evolve. And for Mariah Copeland, the battle had only just begun.